The first time they called her a liar, it was just after noon, when the sun hung high enough to expose everything, dust on boots, sweat on brows, and fear in a woman's eyes. The town square was busy that day, wagons creaking past, doors open to the dry heat, conversations slowing as voices rose in accusation. She stood near the old well, clutching her shawl with both hands like it was the only thing holding her upright. Her dress was plain, travel-worn, and she looked nothing like trouble. Yet trouble had found her all the same. "They say you made it up," someone shouted. Another voice followed, sharper. "Why would a man like him do such a thing?" Her lips trembled as she tried to answer. She had told her story already, quietly at first, then louder when no one seemed to hear. She spoke of what she'd seen, what had been said to her behind closed doors, of promises twisted into threats. Each word felt like tearing open a wound, but she kept going, believing that truth alone should be enough. It wasn't. Murmurs spread through the crowd, growing heavier, uglier. People who had shared meals with her turned their backs. Women whispered behind raised hands. Men shook their heads, already decided. Lies were easier when the truth made everyone uncomfortable. At the edge of it all stood the rancher. He hadn't meant to be there. He'd come into town for supplies, nothing more, but the noise had drawn him in. Now he stood still, arms crossed over his chest, hat pulled low, watching as the crowd closed in around her. He knew her only in passing, a quiet woman, polite, careful. Not someone who sought attention. Certainly not someone who would invent a story like this. Eyes began to turn toward him. Someone called his name. Another nudged him forward. "You know her," a man said. "Say something." His silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Inside him, the truth was loud. He knew who she was accusing. He knew what kind of man he was, too. He had seen the signs years ago, the things everyone chose to ignore because they were inconvenient. He had proof. Small things, tucked away, moments he'd told himself weren't his business. Speaking now would bring all of it into the open. And it would cost him everything. The ranch, the land his father had cleared, the respect he'd spent a lifetime earning, the fragile peace he'd built by staying out of other men's sins. So he said nothing. The crowd took his silence as judgment. "There," someone muttered, "even he won't back her." Her head snapped toward him. For a brief moment, hope lit her face, raw and desperate. She searched his eyes, waiting for a nod, a word, anything. He felt it like a blow to the chest. Then her shoulders sagged. The accusations grew louder. The word liar was spoken openly now, tossed like a stone. She tried to defend herself once more, but her voice broke halfway through, the sound swallowed by disbelief and scorn. When she finally fell silent, it wasn't because she had nothing left to say, it was because no one was listening. The rancher turned away before anyone could see what it cost him to do so. Behind him, the crowd began to disperse, satisfied they'd chosen the easier story. She stood alone by the well, eyes fixed on the ground, as if she were trying to disappear into the dust. He told himself he'd done the sensible thing. But as he walked back to his horse, the word liar echoed in his ears, and he knew the truth had already begun to take its price. Night fell hard and fast, pressing down on the ranch like a weight. The wind picked up after sundown, rattling the loose boards along the porch and sending dust skittering across the yard. The rancher sat alone at his kitchen table, a half-filled mug of coffee growing cold in his hands. He hadn't moved much since returning from town. The silence inside the cabin felt louder than the shouting in the square ever had. He replayed the scene over and over, the way her voice cracked, the moment she looked at him, the instant hope died in her eyes. He told himself again that he'd had no choice, that stepping in would have ruined everything. But the words rang hollow now, echoing against the walls like excuses begging to be believed. A soft knock broke the stillness. He froze, heart thudding once, hard. Another knock followed, hesitant, as if the person on the other side might turn away at any moment. He stood slowly and opened the door. She stood there drenched, hair plastered to her face by rain, shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. Mud streaked the hem of her dress. She looked smaller somehow than she had that afternoon, like the town had already taken pieces of her with it. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, eyes fixed on the floor. "I won't stay long. I didn't know where else to go." He stepped aside without a word and let her in. The door closed behind them with a quiet finality. Inside, the cabin was warm, the lamp casting a soft glow over rough wooden walls. She stood near the door, dripping onto the floor, unsure where to put herself. He handed her a towel and gestured toward the fire. "Sit," he said. His voice was low, careful. She obeyed, perching on the edge of a chair, wringing the towel between trembling fingers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire cracked softly, filling the space where words should have been. "I told them the truth," she said at last, barely above a whisper. "Every word." "I know," he replied. That made her look up. Pain and confusion flashed across her face. "Then why didn't you say so?" The question struck deeper than any accusation in the square. He looked away, jaw tightening. "Because the man you accused, he's not just anyone." She nodded slowly. "I know who he is. And you know what he can do." Her silence was answer enough. She took a shaky breath and began again, telling him everything, how it had started small, how she'd been warned not to speak, how she'd finally found the courage to say something anyway. Each detail landed like a blow. He listened, hands clenched at his sides, knowing with sick certainty that every word was true. When she finished, she waited. Not with hope this time, but resignation. "I won't stay here long," she said softly. "I just needed a night to dry out. Tomorrow, I'll leave town." The thought of her walking away alone tightened his chest. "You can stay," he said. "As long as you need." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "Thank you." He wanted to promise more. Justice, redemption, public truth. But he couldn't. Not yet. The cost loomed too large, the consequences too heavy. You're safe here, he said instead. He won't touch you on my land. She nodded, accepting the limited shield he offered. Later, after she'd fallen asleep in the spare room, he sat alone again, staring into the fire. He knew the truth now lived under his roof. And he knew that keeping silent any longer would cost far more than speaking ever could. Dawn broke pale and unforgiving, the kind of morning that showed everything too clearly. The rancher had been awake long before the light reached the windows, boots on, coat in hand, staring at the door as if it might argue with him. He knew what had to be done. He also knew exactly what it would take from him. She emerged quietly from the spare room, eyes swollen from crying but steady now. She seemed to sense the shift in him, the way resolve sat heavier than regret. You don't have to do anything, she said softly. I never asked you to. He met her gaze, and for the first time since she'd come to town, he didn't look away. I know, he replied. That's why I'm going to. They rode into town together, the air sharp and tense. Word had already begun to spread again, whispers carried faster than truth ever did. When they reached the square, the same faces were there, some curious, some smug, some already convinced the matter was settled. The man she'd accused stood near the courthouse steps, calm and confident, arms crossed like the outcome was already decided. He smiled when he saw the rancher approach, a warning hidden behind friendliness. The rancher didn't hesitate, he stepped forward and spoke. He told them about the things he'd seen over the years, the warnings he'd ignored, the proof he'd kept quiet to protect his own life and land. He named names, he described places, he pulled documents from his coat, old letters, records, small truths that together formed something undeniable. The crowd fell silent, shock rippling through them as the lie collapsed piece by piece. The accused man's face hardened, then twisted into fury. He shouted, threatened, denied, but it was over. The truth had weight now, and it pressed down hard. By the end of the day, the town believed her. But belief came with a price. Within weeks, the rancher felt it closing in. Business dried up, neighbors stopped waving, deals fell through, a legal dispute appeared out of nowhere, backed by money and influence he couldn't fight forever. The land that had been his family's for generations slipped from his hands, acre by acre. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, he stood on the porch of an almost empty house. She came to stand beside him, guilt etched into every line of her face. I'm so sorry, she said. I never wanted this. He shook his head. It was always going to cost something. I just decided who should pay. They left town together the next morning, carrying little more than what mattered. As the road stretched ahead, she looked back once, then forward again. They'll never call me a liar again, she said quietly. No, he answered, they won't. What the truth had taken from him, it had given her back, and in the end, that was the only thing that mattered.